Man, I'm glad to have you on the show. I've never really got to sit down with you and talk to you. I've never really had a chance to get to know you. So I'm really excited to just spend, 40 minutes together. And I think ask you all the things that everybody wants to ask you.
Like, why don't you go away?
Close. Instead, I want to start with this. I want to ask you a question that I think almost every one of your haters and every one of your critics would like to ask. And I think, interestingly, a great amount of your fans would actually like to ask as well. And that is this. What happened to you?
Well, I got to be 53, and I just, I've been in this business my whole life, and I have a very clear memory of the country that I grew up in, and I really liked it. I always liked the United States, and I watched it change, and I watched in those changes a lot of my preconceptions get debunked, and so I changed my opinions along with the changing evidence, which I thought was what you're supposed to do, and I am embarrassed about how wrong I was about a number of different things, but I'm certainly not embarrassed to have changed my mind. What would be embarrassing is if in the face of a mountain of evidence that you were wrong, you resisted admitting it and changing course. So for me, the Iraq War was definitely a pivot point. I was in television then. That was 19 years ago. And I was cheering it on, basically. In effect, I actually had reservations. Even the worst part, in fact, is that I had gut level reservations. I never understood the connection between Saddam Hussein and 9/11. I assumed that the CIA and the various intel agencies of other countries, our allies, Great Britain, France, were correct in saying that Saddam had WMD, but I never exactly understood why it would be a good idea to invade Iraq. But I effectively, passively went along with it. And then I went to Iraq in December of 2003, the day, in fact, Saddam was captured in Tikrit. And I watched the place fall apart, and along with it, a lot of my previous assumptions. And I came back and I admitted I was completely wrong. I'm ashamed. I've been ashamed ever since. And what was so striking about that whole process was how few people were willing to say the same thing. They were like, no, it's a good idea, in the face of really overwhelming evidence that the United States got nothing out of it. And after that, I just thought, I don't know what this is, but I'm against it. I don't think you should lie. I think it's okay to be wrong, but you should never intentionally lie. And I watched people like David Frum and Bill Kristol, people I worked with and respected, who were very smart, for sure, both of them, decide to say things they knew weren't true for whatever reason. I can't guess at their motive, and I found it repulsive, and I still do. So that was really the beginning of my break with the conventional view of things.
And giving someone a compliment is always a dangerous proposition, because probably more often than not, compliments are meant for some other purpose. To
That's for sure.
Make that,
beware flattery, definitely.
Exactly, to make that person like you, whatever it may be. But I'm going to give you a compliment that I think is totally devoid of certainly any ulterior motive, and honestly also devoid of emotion. I said this. I think I'd like to be able to step outside myself and observe myself somewhat objectively, if not objectively self-aware, and say, look, I was at ESPN and I had not yet joined Fox, and I was asked, who would you like to have dinner with? Name your three people. And you were one of the three people. And the reason for that, Tucker, has to do with whatever this transformation is that you've gone through over some period of time. You just described a much longer period of time than the one that I've observed. Of course, I've known who you are for a long time. But your transition, here's the compliment, I think obviously led the country, led a lot of people, and I would say in a lot of ways led me in seeing America through what I think is a more populist lens. I would have probably 10 years ago, Tucker, really recoiled at the idea of populism. Yes, I would have associated it with mob mentality. But listening to you when I wasn't yet at Fox, and you're not the only person, but you are one of the primary people who helped guide, I think, me in a different direction than I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. But I'm curious, where would you say you are today? Like, if you had to put a name or a brand on it, you just described a Tucker that was probably pretty neoconservative at one time. I know you were pretty libertarian at one point. What are you now?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, no one would ever believe me since, I think a conventional view is I'm radical, but I feel and have always felt very moderate. I'm definitely not in favor of destroying things. I really see the world as binary at this point. There are people who create and nurture, and there are those who deface and destroy. It's really there are only two varieties of people. It's dualism, and I want to be on the side that creates and nurtures, that makes things, that improves things, that leaves things for future generations. That sounds high-minded, but I really believe it. And so I don't like any political movement that begins with, hey, let's wreck everything we have and build something brand new, because I just don't believe in that. It doesn't actually work. I like to read. I'm interested in history. Virtually every revolution, with the exception really of ours, has taken the society backward. Whatever society is, whether it's France or the Soviet Union, Russia in 1917, China in 1949, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I feel very moderate. And by the way, I'm not much of a populist either. I mean, people are hierarchical. I have 4 dogs. I know animals are hierarchical. It's just built into our nature. We have a small number of leaders. We look to them for direction. That's not weird. That's just how we're born. So you're always going to have a ruling class. The question is it an impressive ruling class? Are they smart people? Do they have self-restraint? Do they have wisdom? Are they thinking past, the next 20 days? Or are they greedy day traders? And we just have wound up, for a bunch of different reasons, with a really bad ruling class. I'm not against ruling classes at all. Every society has one, but ours are just unimaginably bad. And I think that we should be asking, how did the system that we built up over generations create these people? Where you graduate Yale Law School or go on to McKinsey, and then you wind up with attitudes that hurt the country you're supposed to be leading. Like, how did that happen? No one else seems to be interested. I'm very interested. I mean, I grew up in La Jolla and Georgetown, so it's not like I'm the son of a coal miner. I grew up in a world full of rich, well-educated people. I left that world a few years ago on purpose because I could no longer stand it. But it's not because, I'm like in my heart a farmer. No, in my heart, I grew up a rich kid and I read books, and I just don't like the people currently in charge. I think they're awful. I think they're absolutely awful. And I know them. So I would know. I spent 35 years in Washington from 1985 to 2020. So I'm not kind of guessing about what they're like. I know them personally, and they couldn't be less suited to leadership. And I'm just mad about it. I mean, why wouldn't I be mad about it? Look at the effects. And I would say one other thing, as for populism, my views are very simple. All my views are simple. I don't have complicated views really about anything. But if you're running a country that purports to be a representative democracy, you should serve the majority of people. I mean, so in some way, if you wake up one morning, the life expectancy is declining, you've really gone off track. If people aren't replacing the population through native-born birth rates, that's a red flag. That's a siren. That's an emergency. And if you ignore it, then you suck and you deserve to be replaced. That's kind of how I feel. It's not more complicated than that.
It's so interesting you describe some of your background, that you're from La Jolla. So, a lot of people, I think, again, probably best voiced by your critics, say, okay, how did this guy become the voice of the forgotten man? How did this guy become the voice of populism? And what I hear you telling me is the way that you have, not by calculation, not by any, and that's what you will be accused of. By the way, I feel like I get a lot of the same criticism, just in small doses compared to the heaping doses that you get. But what you're saying is that you arrive at this place because you have inside knowledge, in essence, of those that would be the ruling class, and know how feckless and empty and incompetent that class is.
Right. That's it. I mean, dishonest people always impute dishonest motives to other people. It's like philanderers always assume everyone else is cheating on his wife. That's just the way they are. I've got a lot of faults. I'm not that dishonest, actually. And I just kind of say what I think. Why wouldn't I? I'm 53. There's no advantage in lying. I don't. If I can help it, I mean, I guess if you caught me doing something bad, I would lie about it. But in general, I try not to lie. My motives are super straightforward. And I don't hear much criticism about myself because I'm pretty cut off. But to the extent I hear it, it's like, oh, no, he's doing this for money. No, I'm not. I've never been a money guy, at all. I mean, I remember my producer telling me last summer I was out west fishing, and he's like, there are all these stories about how you're secretly vaxxed and you're casting aspersions on the COVID vaccine because you don't want your audience to get the vaccine or whatever. I said, why would people assume if I'm worried about the vaccine that I was secretly, I'm not vaxxed, I never have been vaxxed. I'm not mad at people who have been vaxxed, but like the idea that I would lie about, why would I lie about that? I would never lie about that. Only liars imagine everyone else is lying. And it really does tell you a lot about the people making those criticisms. I mean, my faults and shortcomings and weaknesses are super obvious. I'm on TV 5 hours a week. So if I, have dumb opinions or, if I eat too many cookies and gain 30 pounds, which I tend to do, everyone knows. Like, I'm not hiding anything. You know what I mean? Like, why would I? I don't. And so the idea that like I'm some trust fund kid who decided that he could make more money pretending to be a car mechanic or something, it's insane. I didn't grow up in rural middle America. I never pretended I did. I just think it's really this simple. I actually like rural areas because I hunt and fish and I like the people. I live in one. But really it's as simple as the people in charge are bad at their jobs. That's demonstrable. We know that from the results. I'm not just attacking people's characters or saying I don't like having dinner with them. I'm saying they're not good at what they do. And by every measure, and they shouldn't be in charge. It's really that simple. I'm not saying that we should like turn out the entire federal bureaucracy and give it to people who work at Napa Auto Parts. I don't know. But people who are good at leading the country should be leading the country. And we don't have those people. So that's a huge problem.
So I do come from that rural middle America place.
Yes.
And, by the way, I arrive at this point of embracing a sense of populism more by I aspired to achieve away from my upbringing, as a lot of small town kids do. I want to make my way to the big city. And what I found, Tucker, once I made it, in this case, whether it was New York City or corporate America of ESPN, what I just found once I got there was these were not more sophisticated individuals interested in high-level debates. These were not people that somehow had any semblance of value. In fact, they had much less a semblance of value than the places and the people where I came from. And there is something about where I came from that is deeply in touch with what it is to be an American, what it is to be a valuable member of society. And not only have that person been forgotten, not only is that person the forgotten man, but that person is reviled. And what is esteemed and held up as virtue now is the opposite of what I at least grew up and what I've always honored as being what it is to be a man or an American or to be a Christian or to just be an honorable contributing member of society. Once I got to the Upper West Side, I was disavowed of any of that and ready to go back to Sherman, Texas.
It's totally right. I mean, I think you're absolutely right that the people in charge hate middle America, and you have to ask yourself why. And the answer is that they failed middle America. They failed middle class America, which is no longer the majority of the country. This happened in, I think, 2015 during the Obama presidency when the middle class became less than the majority of America. So it's no longer a middle class country. That's a huge problem. And they did that by their bad policies, a bunch of them. I mean, I'm not, you know what they are. I'm not going to bore you. But the truth is you hate the people you wrong. If you commit an offense against someone, if you sin against someone, you end up hating that person. And that's really why. And so they invert it all. I mean, the most powerless and reviled people in America are rural people. Obviously, there's they can't get into Stanford no matter what their SAT scores are. No one is putting the thumb on the scale for them. But you watch television and they tell you, the most, underserved, the most marginalized communities are trans people in cities. Really? There's no more privileged group than a trans person in the city. They're like, 1/100th of 1% of the population, we spend 30% of our time talking about them. There is, every possible, the Justice Department, you criticize them and they're like at your door with guns. It's like everything that they describe is the opposite of the reality the rest of us live with. And at a certain point, you just completely devalue your credibility. And I don't believe anything you say, because everything you say is a freaking lie. Not only a lie, it's an inversion of the truth. It's the precise opposite of the truth. And I'm sorry to rant, but that's where we are.
No, I'm always happy to hear a Tucker Carlson rant. You said something earlier, and I've heard you say it before, and it's an interesting thing that you say here. And you're either a wonderful Machiavellian or you are truly honest. And that is that you acknowledge that you have the capability and will at times lie. There are some that go, "Oh, gotcha. Tucker admits he lies." I mean, who can honestly look into a camera or another person's eyes or the mirror and say, "I never tell a lie"? We aspire. It's like objectivity in media. You can aspire to it, but you have no permanent position occupying objectivity. And the same thing with honesty. Your willingness to say, "Look, man, I hope I don't lie. If I'm cornered and I'm in a desperate situation, I'm sure like many flawed human beings, I will lie," is to me evidence of your honesty. Or you are just like a next level Machiavellian at all times.
I'm too old for that.
Here's what I want to ask you.
I can't keep up with it all. No, of course. I mean, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I would never lie. I really love my wife. I've been with her for 38 years. If I don't drink, but let's say I got drunk and slept with some random girl and got caught doing it, I would probably deny it because I wouldn't want to be caught doing that, because it's an awful thing to do. So, of course, I mean, what is this? I didn't even know that's held up as some example of my deep dishonesty. Whatever. I don't know. My view is you can kind of tell who's telling the truth. You can smell it. I always tell my children this. The main loss of modernity is of our instincts, and we're taught to ignore them. And again, I spend a lot of time with animals. I really love animals. And animals have one advantage over us. They don't have opposable thumbs or a sense of the future, but they do have a very close, in fact, that's all they have is their instincts, and their instincts are spot on. If I always tell my kids, if you think somebody's creepy, he is. If you think someone's lying to you, you're right. Don't second guess it. If you perceive danger, it's real. And don't override those feelings, those instincts with your higher consciousness, because you're in effect lying to yourself.
I don't like this part of the podcast because in the previous episode of my podcast, I, in a confessional moment, said to my audience that I fully, in all self-awareness, understand that I'm a slow burn. So your initial instinct about me may not be exactly what it is if you invest a little time in Will Cain. But Tucker's telling everyone, run, your initial instinct is right. And one of my favorite lines of all time is going to be, "Animals don't have opposable thumbs or a sense of the future." But, so let me springboard off this, because you've sort of introduced it twice, and you've said this. I think you've said it on Tucker Carlson Tonight, and it's absolutely true. You, interestingly, for someone who has his name in his own show and spends an hour, at least a good portion of that hour, monologuing, you do not talk about yourself a lot. And I find that admirable, and I actually find it something that lends credibility to what it is you have to say. You're not pouring everything through the first person, but people's curiosity about you remains. So what will you tell me? And I appreciate your privacy. I do, especially for a guy who they've literally showed up at your door. The mob has literally banged on your door. What can you tell me? You said you live rural. You said you love being around animals. What is life like for Tucker Carlson on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I would just say two things about the first thing you said. I really try not to talk about myself, not because I'm paranoid about security, though I probably should be, but because I'm not from a culture where that's rewarded or encouraged at all. And it was really, really discouraged in the family that I grew up in, using the word "I" all the time, or being a narcissist, and same with my wife and I are from the same world. So that is not something that we would encourage in our children at all. And I don't like it. And I'm also not that interesting. It's like, there's this whole world out there, and I don't live a particularly fascinating life. We do, live in a really rural area. We've got 4 dogs. I live with my wife. We have 4 kids. They're all gone. And we're very close to them, but they don't live with us anymore. And they all left. They all went to boarding school when they were young. So we've lived alone for a while. And I wake up, I usually sit on the front porch with my wife, have a cup of coffee, talk about stuff, or if it's cold out, it's freezing where I live right now. So we get back into bed with the dogs and drink our coffee in bed because it's cold. And then I sketch out my show in the morning. Here's who I think we should be interviewing, and here's what I think the stories are. And then I usually write on my phone some of the open, like the inchoate thoughts that I have about it. And then that's done, and it's like I feel like the show's nailed down. And then I always go out, no matter where I am, and try to be outside. Today I went. It's partridge season where I live, ruffed grouse season, and so I took we have 4 spaniels. 2 of them are bird dogs, and 2 of them are kind of aged out, but 2 of them are really in their prime. So I went partridge hunting today, which I often do in October, late September and October, and so we just hop in the truck, go to the woods, and hunt partridge. I saw 1, and it's also turkey season, and I saw 6 turkeys, and I didn't get any birds, but I love watching the dogs work. I also fish a lot. I fly fish, so we trout fish a lot, the dogs and I. And so I try to get out a couple hours every day, hunting or fishing in the woods, or stuff like that. Because that's really important to me. I grew up doing that, and I continue to do it. My children do it. My friends do it. So it's just, that's something that I've done all my life, and I really, really love it. And but it's important. And then I come back. I take a sauna every day, and get out of the sauna, have a cup of coffee, and then just sit down to write. And I filed the script at 7:45. Throw on my necktie, walk about 20 feet into the studio, and bang out the show. So it's actually not that interesting.
It actually is. It actually is. I'm sorry. You don't get off that scot-free by dismissing your own life as uninteresting. So here are my follow-up questions. So you love animals. You mentioned dogs. What other animals are a part of your life? Is it only wild game outside of the dogs, or do you have horses and other things
we just
on
have,
the estate?
We have Springer Spaniels. I live in a tiny house. I live in the house I grew up in, actually. So weird. In my childhood bedroom, yes. And no, we have a super small house, and I married my high school girlfriend, so we're kind of living the life that we've always lived in some ways. But though we lived in the city, but we had a family house, so we now live in that, and I really love it. And so does she, and we've just been together so long. We're pretty like-minded about stuff. And she's a nature person also. We're very pro-tree in my family, very extremely pro-tree. So we have look, you get to 53 and you're with the same chick your whole life, you can get into your own world. So we spend we don't ever talk politics in our house. My wife is a reader. I am a reader. We talk about what we're reading. We talk about trees. We talk about dogs. We talk about our children. That's my life. We don't go anywhere. We have a ton of house guests. We always have people staying with us all the time. And we've got people. We had people last night. We're having people come tomorrow. We always have people staying with us, which I really enjoy. And so does she. And so it's a very low-key life. We don't have a TV. We're not on the internet all the time. I get all my news by text message. I'm kind of done all that, and I'm not that interested in being influenced or in letting that shit into my head, because I just don't think much of it. I'm just being honest. I really don't.
So you don't see anything. You don't do social media. You don't see any Google alerts on Tucker Carlson in the news. You don't see anything.
No, I don't have a Google alert. I never read about myself. I don't know what people are saying. I grew up in a family that was good and bad in all families. But one good thing about my family was people were pretty serious about reading, and serious in the sense that, a book is an investment. You're not going to read that many in the course of your life. You should be thoughtful about the books you choose. It doesn't mean that you're always reading, Aeschylus or the history of the Punic Wars, but that you're thoughtful about how you spend your time reading. And my brother and my father are big readers. I'm sitting in the middle of our family library right now. You can't see it, but there are a lot of books, and a lot of really good books. So, and my wife is the same way. So she reads mostly fiction, and I read mostly nonfiction. But yeah, that's important to us. And so I don't want to.
What are you reading right now?
On Google. I'm reading right now. I just finished a P.G. Wodehouse novel. He wrote 107 of them. We've read most of them. We really like P.G. Wodehouse, my wife and I, and my kids. But I am reading now an amazing book, and I'm almost done, called The Psychology of Totalitarianism by Matthias Desmet, who's a Belgian psychology professor and one of the true geniuses I've spoken to. I don't talk to too many geniuses because there aren't many geniuses, but he is one. And this book is really changed my view on a lot of it's ostensibly about COVID, but it's not really about COVID. It's about the way the modern mind works, and it's amazing. I've sent it to a bunch of people. I'm very overbearing about this stuff, and so I've I sent it to all my children. Amazon makes it super easy to just send books to people. So this book I'm very impressed by. In fact, I'm so impressed by it that I read like 3 pages in bed. I always have a spaniel on my chest, and then I'll just stop and think about it because my brain's not quite big enough to take it all in.
So I want to make sure I remember everything I want to ask. Here's something that occurs to me. You just said, I use Amazon. It makes it too easy to send books to my children. You also mentioned earlier, by the way, that your children went to boarding school. And I know that at least a couple of them are currently at major universities in the United States. And I'm honest with my listeners and viewers as well. My sons, after going to a charter school in New York City, are in a private school now in Dallas. And they do not, meaning the schools, live up to my hopes and expectations and requirements. And then the obvious next question is, well, then why do they get my money? I'm curious about how you approach that. I think we share a lot of the same views about education and morality and value. And then, for example, one of my brothers said to me last night, well, then why do you wear Jordans, Will? Why do you wear Nike? Why do you and Pete wear Nike? And I say, I don't know, man. I'm not a Puritan. I can't live a puritanical life. I can't live perfectly. Your children are a place, I think, where we both would say you should aspire, especially in their education, to live out our values. Yes. How do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile using Amazon and sending your kids to schools that don't reflect your values?
Well, I hate Amazon, and I can't reconcile it. I'm a filthy hypocrite. I try not to use it, but I actually don't like buying things very much. So there's that. So that kind of keeps me away from it anyway, and I don't like the internet in general. But the school thing was a really big thing. I won't even get into it, but I married someone who is, grew up exactly like I did. And so we just had a lot of shared experiences and shared views about how you raise children and a whole bunch of other things. And so for our kids, we basically just mindlessly did for them exactly what had been done for us and our parents and our grandparents and literally our great-grandparents. Like everyone,
as people do,
everyone did exactly the same thing. I mean, my great-grandmother went to the same high school that every woman in my wife's family went to. It's like literally my great-grandmother, who was born in the 19th century, did that. So we just didn't think about it very deeply at all. And so our children, 3 out of 4, went to the same high school that we went to, where we were married, and like we just unfolded this childhood that was very familiar to us, and we didn't think deeply enough about it. And I would also say that whole world that we grew up in changed completely and collapsed, and it doesn't exist anymore. And a lot of things happened that if I ever have time, I'll write a book about. But it was shocking to both of us. And my wife is not political at all. She's the same instincts I do. We agree on everything, but she's not. I mean, she hasn't read about politics in the 31 years we've been married. I mean, she's not interested. So she didn't see it coming. I didn't really see it coming either. Bottom line, we grew up in the Episcopal Church. I would never send my children to an Episcopal Church school. And they went from, pre-K through high school to Episcopal schools. I would never do that again. I would never go to an Episcopal church again.
I mean, why don't you just take a personal shot at me? I'm sending my kids to Episcopal school as we speak.
Well, so I know, that's how I grew up. I went to Episcopal school. So did everyone in my family going back, a long time. So our whole world just collapsed. And I'm not really mad about it, but you have to, this is what I was saying at the outset. You have to adjust to reality as you find it. I'm not in charge of American society or of historical trends. at all. So, if things change dramatically, you have to adjust. I can say, we all went on vacation this summer, all four of the kids and my wife and I went, and I asked all of them, would you send your children, to the same schools that we went to, you went to, your grandparents went to? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't think they would. I don't think they will. Because it's all gone now, whatever. You can't control it.
Yeah. I'm personally experiencing it. My kids, as I mentioned, go to an Episcopal school in Dallas. Hey, I'm familiar with Matthias Dement. He was on Tucker Carlson today. I believe he's been one of the leaders in talking about mass formation psychosis. So I am familiar with the guy who is now the author of the book of which you are in love with as we speak, the one that you're reading. Which brings me also to this. You have a new Tucker Carlson original, which I don't think is a huge segue here. It's not a huge left-hand turn for me to say. This ties into some of our conversation as well. It's called The End of Men. I've seen some of it. I've seen parts of it. It's about testosterone.
Yes.
It seems a little tongue-in-cheek in some places, but also, no, addressing a very serious issue that we've lost the concept of masculinity.
Yeah, not just the concept of masculinity, but the physical components that make it possible. I mean, the drop in testosterone, which is the key sex hormone that makes men, is remarkable. It's not debatable. It's measurable. It has been measured in the last 40 years. The testosterone levels in American men have plummeted. No one knows why. Some people have theories on it. I have theories on it. None of them have been proven. Don't think NIH is studying this. And that's kind of the point. All of a sudden, men are different physically than they were when I was a child. Now, I don't know why nobody cares about that. I think there are all kinds of effects. Men seem very passive to me. I think there's a reason, people always say, well, young men just smoke weed and play video games and never go outside. And yeah, well, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe they're physically different. And I'm not bringing a lot more to the conversation than that observation, but it seems like a profound one. And why does nobody care? If estrogen levels were plummeting and, half of American women were growing mustaches, I think we would acknowledge that as a problem. It's a huge problem. Sex differences are the basis of every civilization. They're necessary to perpetuate humanity itself. You don't have children unless you have men and women. So why does nobody care? And I care. And so the purpose of this documentary was just to point out that this is happening. But the people who run our society seem uninterested in why. There are individuals who are very concerned about it. They have theories about it. They have what they believe are effective remedies to it. And here's what they are. And it's just kind of that. But I think it's worth declaring that an emergency because it is.
Well, it's an emergency. I've always observed this, Tucker, as a cultural emergency. Obviously, we know that, depression, suicide, and these types of big societal markers are really bad, really negative when it comes to men, and particularly young men. And I've always observed that as a loss of purpose. Yes, a denial of masculinity. But you're taking this the next step further. You're actually looking at it from, I guess, a hormonal place. And so I'm curious. I don't know if you want to share your theories, but look, diets have changed drastically over the last half century. Modern medicine has changed drastically over the last half century. Why? Why are we seeing a drop in testosterone?
You're also seeing concurrently a dramatic rise in chronic diseases. Fewer people are dropping dead of heart attacks. They're being denied the sweet release of heart disease, as a doctor once said to me. But many more people have autoimmune disorders, type 2 diabetes, asthma, many more people. So what is that? And again, I don't know the answer, but I do know that our food supply is terrible. I partake of it a lot. I love pizza and wheat thins and chocolate chip cookies and every other garbage, low income type food that there is. I love that stuff, but it's clearly bad for you. And if you go to countries, I've spent a lot of time in other countries, and if you go to countries that have lower GDPs than ours and eat the food, you realize, you can just feel it. This food is much better for me than the stuff I'm getting in the United States. So there's clearly something wrong with our food supply. There's clearly something wrong with the way the Department of Agriculture created the food pyramid. This is all much picked over, but clearly we're being, on some level, poisoned by what we eat, obviously. So I would just say, without getting into waters that are too deep for me and about which I don't have sufficient knowledge to speak intelligently, I will say the big questions are always the ones we ignore. We spend an endless amount of time debating the minutia, angels dancing on the head of a pin, but like we never step back and say, we're on the verge of a nuclear war with Russia. Our debt is literally unsustainable. Testosterone is falling to the point where we may not be able to reproduce. And the life expectancy of your average American is in decline. These are the big things. The big things are where you need to focus your attention, in my view. And by the way, UFOs are real. Like there are other beings. No, but that's verified. We don't know what they are. But
no, trust me. When I sit in for you, and I'm honored to do so, and it's always weird because it's like, job. Hey, well, I appreciate that, but it's like house sitting. I'm there with the ghost of Tucker Carlson. I don't really know Tucker, but I can see the pictures of his family, and I can see how it works and what's in the fridge.
Reach for the fridge all you want.
But let me tell you something. One of my favorite things in the fridge is the UFO story, because I agree it's a little bit of a big story. Like, the fact that there are unidentified flying objects that the government acknowledges, can't quite put our finger on it. But hey, so I sat in for you last Friday and I experienced some of this, and I do it here on the Cain Podcast as well. But you know what I find fascinating? As you address these major questions, like, hey, what's the risk reward on nuclear war? As you address these major questions, I am shocked. And here's the deal, Tucker. You can expect this from Media Matters and the people that are paid to hate you. You can expect this from the far left, that no matter what you said, they're going to take the opposite. I'm really shocked at some of the people who I think you probably have been friends with in the past, who would have been ideological compatriots, who don't even deign to offer a rebuttal to whether or not the United States might have sabotaged the Nord Stream pipeline. They don't formulate an argument. It's simply, and this is my latest episode before you and I together, it's simply F you. That's the argument. It's your Putin tool, and it's F you. I mean, it's literally what the Ukrainian ambassador offered up, right? That was his offering up of diplomacy to Elon Musk. F you. There's no attempt at a real effort at persuasion.
Well, yeah. I mean, and this is a symptom of this larger thing that you're seeing everywhere, which is the rise of irrational behavior. Masks just work. Just shut up and take the vax. My 15-year-old got no risk from COVID. Why should she take the vax and risk myocarditis? Shut up and take it. What are you, against science? And look, it pains me as an American and as someone who's always been, I think, patriotic in the most basic sense. I love America. I'm not going anywhere. I don't have another passport. It pains me to ever think the U.S. government is involved in something that it shouldn't be, or that we've committed some crime, because it's being done in my name, for one thing, as an American. But the idea that Russia, whatever its many sins, or Putin, however evil and crazy he may be, blew up his own pipelines in the middle of a war, when those pipelines are the main source of his foreign currency. I mean, the Russian energy business is Russia. Okay, that's the thing that they sell abroad to keep their government running, and it's army fed and armed. And the fact that they would blow those up, thereby ending any leverage they might have over Germany, which is obviously the biggest economy in Europe and the country that you need on your side, is insane. It's just, that doesn't make any sense. Now, if you have evidence that happened, okay, I believe in UFOs, so I'm willing to believe anything, okay? Just show me them. They have zero evidence. Meanwhile, you have the President of the United States threatening to do it before the invasion. You have other government officials doing the same. And now you have last Friday, you had the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, saying that the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines was a good thing. So, put that all together.
Right.
It seems like the United States had a hand in it. I doubt Navy divers did it, but I wouldn't be surprised if British Navy divers did it with the help of the United States. But I don't know. But I'm pretty sure Putin didn't do it.
Hey, let me, it actually would feel really poor for me to spend 45 minutes talking to you and simply talk about all the things we agree. And the truth is, I don't know where I'm going to reach for disagreement. Instead, what I'm going to do is be devil's advocate. I'm going to try to embody somebody's argument who actually won't forward that argument to you. They're just going to call you a Putin apologist. So as I watch you tell the story of Ukraine and Russia, I actually don't even know if I know your position on what should be American policy. I actually just see you asking for honesty so the American people can make that decision democratically. Yeah. But there, and I've had KT McFarland. I respect KT on my program, and we've talked about it, and she said to me, Russia did it clearly, Will, and she's laid out the argument. And I said to her quite bluntly, I don't buy it. So it's not convincing to me at this point. But this is the way that I want to have a conversation, honestly. One of the most compelling arguments for people that, again, I don't even know if this is in rebuttal to you, but they say, how valuable would it be for the United States of America to invest, at this point it looks like $80 billion? $80 billion roughly in a war where we don't lose a single American life and we hobble one of our geopolitical rivals in Russia. And maybe that's the Dan Crenshaw argument. I don't know. I don't know whose argument. That is definitely an argument made out there that this is actually a very successful policy that doesn't actually, in the end, cost a single American life. What do you say to that?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One, I don't see Russia as our main rival on the world stage. I don't see it as even approaching that level of threat to the United States. Our main rival is China. And so I have no idea why you wouldn't want Russia on your side, Putin on your side, as some sort of rough alliance against China. And the same would be true for every European and Eurasian country. Like, why wouldn't you want that? I think that you would if you were serious about the Chinese threat, which of course we're not. So that's the first thing I would say. Second, I'm certainly not for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm not for anything that destabilizes the world. I'm not pro-Putin in any sense. I don't have strong feelings about Putin or about Russia or about Ukraine. And that's kind of the point. I didn't really see where the American interest in this was. I still don't see it. And I see very clearly now what the downside could be, which is nuclear annihilation. And, nuclear weapons have not been used since the summer of 1945, when we destroyed Nagasaki. And so our understanding of nuclear weapons is almost 80 years old. But the technology has advanced to the point where, and talk to anyone who understands it, and I have, to the point where, it's hard to comprehend how destructive it is. A nuclear strike on New York would eliminate New York and also destroy North Carolina. So, these are weapons that are much more powerful than the average person understands. Putin is, if he's as crazy and evil as they tell us he is, why wouldn't he use them? So a victory over Putin is not necessarily a win for us. It's very easy to see how beating Putin would mean destroying ourselves. And I'm completely baffled as to why you'd even want to risk that. And if I'm being totally honest, I would say the second people start talking about nuclear strikes, whether they're tactical nukes or limited nuclear engagements or whatever, that's the moment when I look back and say, you're insane. You have no idea what you're talking about. I saw David Petraeus, who reportedly is very smart. I've met him. It seems smart, I guess. He was saying, well, if Russia uses nuclear weapons in Ukraine, we'll blow up the Black Sea Fleet. And it's like, first of all, if anybody uses nuclear weapons in any theater, we're on the brink of destroying the world, and that's not an exaggeration at all. So you don't even want to have that. That's so reckless and crazy that I can't believe. Again, I'm astounded by the recklessness of the people in charge. That should never be on the table. That should never be under consideration. It should only be implied. And I think that previous generations of generals and statesmen and presidents and secretaries of state understood that implicitly. They didn't need to be told, if you're talking about nuclear strikes, you've already lost, you freaking lunatic.
And I think you just laid out the answer in a way that makes sense to me on the rebuttal to that. Well, we've invested in destroying Russia without losing American life. And the answer to that in rebuttal is yet. You keep messing around with regime change. And what does a wounded animal do in the corner? In this case, Vladimir Putin, he uses his nuclear weapons.
Why would we want to destroy Russia? I've never understood that. Why would we want to destroy Russia? Okay, you destroy Russia. For one thing, Russia is not Iraq. It's not Syria. It's not Libya. It's not Afghanistan. It's not a developing country very far away. It's a semi-European country that's actually quite advanced, that makes its own airplanes and has 6,000 nuclear weapons. So there's that. It's not, we've been trained to think that wars can drag on, but they can drag on at relatively little cost to the United States. That is not what we're looking at here at all. But moreover, why would you want to destroy Russia? Is there some inherent good in that? I just don't, and I'm not pro-Russian. I've never been to Russia. I love Tolstoy.
I like Dostoevsky, but that's kind of the extent of my tie to Russia. I have no kind of dog in the fight. But why would you want to? I think that's very weird. Russia is not a gas station. You hear these stupid, no one's dumber than Republican members of Congress, if I can just say, and you hear them say, ooh, Russia is just a gas station with a country. No, actually, Russia is a real place with a real history. It's a 1,000-year history. Like, why would you want to destroy that? So you can feel powerful, you moron? Like, I just don't understand it at all.
Can you put your finger on when it was that you lost your attraction for M&Ms?
For what?
For M&Ms.
Oh man,
your what was it? I don't know. I don't think it was your monologue, but your statement of M&Ms being made less sexy. That was something, man. That was
and
a mark
I say that
of
as someone who's always loved M&Ms, not the regular M&Ms or not even the peanut centered the Reese's Pieces M&Ms, but just like the conventional peanut M&Ms, the big ones, the marble sized ones. And I've always loved M&Ms, and I'll just admit that. You know what I mean? It's just I'm a Mars guy, but I was sad to see the Mars Corporation going woke. I mean, just leave my candy alone. And I would say that if it was Zach Butterfinger, do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter.
Oh, it was quite a statement. M&Ms reducing the size of the heels on the green M&M. What's wrong with America?
I try to keep, you know what? I'm a little cut off, but I try to keep abreast of trends.
2 small questions and 1 big one, and I'll let you go in respect that you have a show to do tonight. 2 small questions. I asked you what book you're reading now. What is your favorite book that you would recommend to all people? You need to read this book.
Oh, gosh. There are so many. I mean, I've never really moved past Orwell. I love Orwell's journalism. I would say, a couple essays which have stuck with me for life. I read them as a child, and I don't reread a lot of things, but I love the essay "How the Poor Die" by George Orwell, which was his account. It's probably, I don't know how many words it is. It's probably 3,000 words. His account of winding up in a French charity hospital in Paris during the Depression. I think about that essay all the time. Shooting an elephant, hanging. I would recommend Orwell's collected journalism to anybody, and his stories to anyone. I would also, as I said, recommend P.G. Wodehouse, and also Evelyn Waugh. I have a weakness. I have contempt for the United Kingdom, I couldn't say, but I really do, real contempt for how they've destroyed themselves and how much they hate themselves. It makes me sick. But I do love British comic novels, Kingsley Amis, Evelyn Waugh. I love that. I just really, Graham Greene, the comedians, Our Man in Havana. I just love that stuff. Love it. Gave it to all my kids.
Do you watch anything? Do you watch movies, prestige, television series, Yellowstone, Game of Thrones?
Personally, I mean, I work in TV, so obviously I'm very in favor of the medium, but I'm extremely dyslexic. Whatever the learning disability is, and it affects certain things. And one of them is my spatial relations are screwed up. I can't park a car, stuff like that. But I cannot watch video. It just makes me so anxious. I just can't watch it. No, I haven't watched a movie, or as I said, we don't have a TV, but even if we did, I guess you can watch it on your iPad or something. I don't have an iPad at home either. I keep it in my office, but no, I don't watch anything. But I keep hearing, like for my children, for example, that there are, great series out there, which I love. I love that that there's still creativity in the medium. I think movies have died, but people keep telling me that there are all these great shows. So I love that. But no, I don't personally. It's just, I just don't like the medium, at all.
Okay, last question. I'm sorry to end on sort of like a big one here as we go out, but it's going to bring us full circle in that we began talking about sort of your transformation over time, and you did, interestingly, reject the idea of populism. You said, look, human beings are hierarchical, all animals are hierarchical, and there will always be a ruling class. I don't think I'm definitely not as well-read as you are, but I try to be fair, and I try to read as much as possible. And I think it would be fair that there are, and this is certainly not something I'm attributing to you, so even bringing it up is not guilt by association. It's more a genuine curiosity, and what your answer will be on this. But there are some on the right that have I think, come to the conclusion that the republic is lost, that if it's an administrative state, it's on autopilot. And if that's the case, the only real salvation for the country is a strong man, is a Caesar. And I don't mean that that it has to be a tyranny, but a competent CEO to cut the thing down to size. Of course, I think it's a mistake because I don't consider what comes after the CEO.
Right.
But I'm curious, with your acknowledgement that there will always be a ruling elite, how do you see the future? How do you see a fortuitous and virtuous future for America? Who is that ruling elite? I mean, maybe your answer is a Caesar. I'm not leading you in that direction, but acknowledging that there are people on the right that will put everything on the table. I don't think it's a large group of people, but there's some. And I think that everyone should be asking ourselves this question: is what is the future of our republic?
Yeah, what do we want? I mean, I know what I want. This is when you asked, my views, and I didn't give a very interesting answer because I don't have very interesting views. But, I lived in this country in 1985. I think it was like a great year. Country had a lot of problems or whatever, but compared to what? And it was a very middle-class country with basically bourgeois values, and with that American strain of libertarianism, you do your thing, I'll do mine, and we're not going to get in each other's faces over it. And I like that. I like that. There was people had something in common with each other. Do you know what I mean? My brother said to me once, we grew up in this affluent town, and we would go up to Lake Tahoe to ski in the winter, and because we were basically affluent people, but we would always eat at Denny's. We drove. We'd always stay at Motel 6. You know what I mean? And my brother said to me, I wonder if there's anybody in La Jolla, everyone has a ski house in Tahoe, which is a long way away. I wonder if anyone drives, with the dogs in the car and stays at Motel 6. And of course the answer is what? No, they're living, and I'm not attacking them, but I get it, but they're living completely different lives. They fly maybe in their own plane or a friend's plane, or they charter or whatever. They're not going to Motel 6 because there's no broad middle in the country anymore. And that's what I would like more than anything. Ultimately, I'm an egalitarian. I am. We're Scandinavian. I just feel that way. I can't control myself. I want to live in a country where, lots of different kinds of people, different races. I'm all about, that's great. Pluralism, great. But ultimately that we're united in some kind of common American culture where every person feels, I hate the word, but empowered as a citizen. Hey, I'm a citizen. I'm a taxpayer. You never hear anybody say that anymore. You can't fuck with me. I pay my taxes. I follow the law. I know my rights. I'm not a peon. I'm not a serf. I'm not your slave. I don't care if you're an FBI agent or the president of the United States. I have as many rights as you do. And I know what those rights are. And we stand equal to each other. We are peers because we're both Americans. That's the attitude I want. And that attitude only grows out of democratic government, a government where every person feels that he is vested in the system, that his vote is worth every bit as much as his neighbor he disagrees with. And that's the country that I grew up in. And they'll try and tell you, oh, it's just racist dystopia. That's a lie. No, it wasn't. I was here. It was not a racist dystopia. It was a nice country with some problems, but fundamentally the nicest country that's ever been. And it was nice because in the end, everybody, or the overwhelming majority, had something in common with everybody else. And I want to get back to that. That's my vision for America. And again, that's only possible in a democracy. The problem with the strongman, there are many problems with the strongman, but one of them is the message that it sends to everyone else is there are multiple tiers. You're either in the royal family or you're a subject of the royal family. And that creates, no man can be a citizen, a full citizen in a monarchy. And I don't want that at all. I do think democracy is very problematic in a country that's divided. I think it's always been a difficult system to administer. It's certainly an easy system to subvert. Cheating is really easy in a democracy. There was a lot of cheating in the last election. I'm not allowed to say that. It's true. And so it's hard, but I still think it's worth it because the outcome is a country where each person, regardless of income or birth or color, has dignity and rights. I'm an American. You know what I mean? You can't talk to me that way. I have dignity. And that's essential. Yeah, it's essential.
And that's, where you're not afraid to get pulled over by the police, even if you've been speeding, because, they may fine you. They may even arrest you if you're going too fast. But in the end, you're safe because you're a citizen and they can't dick with you too much. Anyway, that's what I mean.
Yeah, I think I understand. I think it's not far from my vision, which I would describe as communitarian. Yeah. I mean, I want citizens who are invested in something and see the reward of that investment and the human connection that comes along with small towns, small neighborhoods, small communities, a job. And it just feels like we're becoming a refined monolith where everyone is disconnected and we've lost community.
Well, completely. And
I don't
people
think
form their own communities. Like one thing that I always notice when I travel, which isn't that much anymore, but I've been to all 50 states more than twice. I mean, I've really been most places in America for sure, is how there'll be these huge things happening, these huge movements or cultural trends, subcultures within this country that I knew nothing about. It's like the country's so big and it's so diverse in a basic sense, no majority anything, that you can have little countries within the country. And I'm not against that. I like regionalism, but you have to figure out what unites everybody. The country does not remain united just by accident or because, no. It's a physics principle. It will break apart unless you thoughtfully figure out a way to keep it together. And I don't think anyone's thinking about that at all.
Big questions, as you said. No one's considering the big questions. Man, thank you so much. I feel like I've only scratched the surface. I could talk to you for hours. But instead, what I'll do is I'll be watching Tucker Carlson Original, The End of Men, and I'll be watching Tucker Carlson Tonight. Thank you so much,
Thank you, Will.
Tucker.
I love that. And come, where I live. Come see me.
I'd love to. I would love to. I've never hunted partridges before, so I'd love to add it to the list. Duck, deer, elk, partridges. Okay, I'll see you, man.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain Podcast for full episodes right now.